Hey folks, Crimson Blaze here. Welcome to the channel. In last week's video, you saw that I backpacked the Art Loeb Trail in North Carolina. You also saw that I had some pretty bad weather on day one, where it was raining on and off, and then it just kind of came and stayed, and then it began to hail and even snowed on us at the end of that day. Well, the weather forecast for that trip was supposed to be much worse. It called for rain all day Friday, snow showers on Saturday morning, and then scattered rain throughout the rest of that day. And luckily, the weather didn't turn out that bad. But I did prepare for heavy rain. So in today's video, I thought I would talk about some of the rain tips that I use and how I prepare for a backpacking trip when I'm expecting heavy rain. Let me first say that there are a few things that I'm going to take on my backpacking trip, whether it's going to rain or not. But the things I'm going to show you, I think, are critically important if you are expecting heavy rain. So this gear and how I use this gear and some of those tips, this is for when you're expecting just heavy rain, all day rain on, multiple days of your trip. This is not just for when it has a random shower here or there. These are tips and gear advice that I use when I'm expecting heavy rain. So with that being said, the first thing I'm gonna have is a pack liner. So this is a Nitrile pack liner. It weighs less than an ounce, and I'll always put this inside of my backpack, especially if it's gonna be raining hard all day. Because what I put in there is, my shelter, my sleep system, my clothes, my pillow, everything that I want to make sure stays dry. It cannot get wet. If it gets wet, then my trip is going to be ruined. So I'll always have a pack liner, and I think it really gives me a lot of security when I'm expecting heavy rain. But like I said, even if I'm not expecting heavy rain, I think the pack liner is important because I think we've all been there where we're crossing a stream or a creek, and you're either on a log, you're on slippery rocks, and you fall, right? You fall into the water with your backpack, and now your pack is soaking wet. Well, that pack liner is still going to keep all of my stuff nice and dry. The next thing that I'm always going to take with me is a rain jacket. And this one I love is the Frog Togs rain jacket. And I'll always bring a rain jacket because if you've done enough backpacking in the mountains or just hiking, you know that random storms can pop up, here and there. The weather in the mountains is a bit more unpredictable. So I'll always have a rain jacket. But if it's going to rain heavy, like all day, then I want something a little bit more functional. And so I have this North Face rain jacket, and I like this because one, it's not breathable either, so just like the Frog Togs, but it has pit zips on the side. And I think that is important because when you are hiking all day, up and down mountains, then, you're going to be generating a lot of heat. And if it's raining, you want that heat to be able to escape. So I like having the pit zips to unzip them, gives me a little more ventilation, or a zipper trying to just allow more air flowing in while it is raining on me. And so I'm just not cooking underneath this because it's not breathable, right? So I like the fact that it has pit zips. I also like the fact that it has pockets. So the Frog Tog doesn't have pockets on it. So I like having a pocket that I can put my hand in. I also like having pockets that I can put my phone or maybe my mic or some other electronics, things that I want to easily access. And this jacket has pockets on the outside and it has pockets on the inside. So I like being able to put things inside of my rain jacket as opposed to my hip belt pockets, and my food doesn't get wet, some electronics doesn't get wet. So if I'm expecting heavier rain, then I'm going to bring that North Face jacket because it has a bit more functionality. This next piece of gear I've debated for a while whether I should take it on trips, and that is a pack cover. So obviously this covers the back of your backpack. Well, for me, the stuff that I have in my back mesh pocket or my side pockets, I don't care if they get wet. You know, I have like my Catadine, Be-Free water filter. I have my tarp, my stakes, my hammock suspension, my cook pot, things like that. I don't care if they get wet. So, why do I need a pack cover? I have my liner that's keeping everything inside nice and dry. I don't care if the stuff on the outside gets, so why do I need a pack cover? Well, on this Art Loeb trip, one thing I found where this would have been really useful that I didn't do. So you'll notice in this trip, in the beginning, I did have a pack cover. And, it was raining on and off, on and off. So I'm taking my rain jacket on and off, and the pack cover on and off. And it's like, it's annoying. Eventually I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna leave my pack cover off. Well, again, I wasn't worried about the stuff getting wet, but because we had freezing temps that night, I woke up to my hammock suspension was frozen. The cordage on my tarp was frozen. The cordage on my stakes were frozen because they were wet, right? Because they were wet and then it froze overnight. And so it took a little bit of work, to get that stuff kind of thawed out a little bit. And that's when it would have been nice to have left my pack cover on. Even though I didn't care that it got wet, if it got frozen, that is when it made things difficult. So the back of my backpack was frozen, my hip belt pockets were frozen, and it just made life a little more difficult. So I think I would definitely recommend, if you're going to have kind of freezing temps and it's been raining all day, cover your stuff because it's going to get frozen the next day. Now let's talk clothes. One thing I typically do not take on my backpacking trips are rain pants. But if I know it's going to rain all day, I think having rain pants is important. Because typically, even if it's raining a little bit on and off, I don't mind if my shorts get wet because they're quick drying shorts and they'll generally dry as I'm hiking through that day or overnight. But if I'm expecting heavy rain throughout the day and days, then I like having a good pair of rain pants to go along with it. And these were really great, especially on this trip, because not only did they provide me protection from the rain, but they gave me warmth as well in the morning. Like I said, the temperature's around 30 degrees, and I was glad to have these rain pants. Another thing I recommend is bringing a pair of backup clothes. Now, I'll typically take backup clothes with me on most of my trips because I just like getting into camp and having a fresh set of clothes. That helps me sleep better at night. But when it's raining a lot, I think it's important to have a set of backup clothes because there's no better feeling than getting into camp and you're cold and you're wet and you want to put on a dry set of clothes. Now your clothes that you're hiking in should be fairly dry, right? If you have your rain jacket and your rain pants, but there are times when it can get a little bit wet. So I like getting into camp, putting on 100% dry clothes, and they're warm, and just kind of settling in at camp that night, and then letting my other clothes dry. And I'll put my other clothes, my hiking clothes, in my clothes bag, and that will typically dry them by the next morning. So I'll kind of swap them in and out. If it's raining a lot like that, then I'll kind of swap them in and out with the clothes that I wear. Another clothing item that I bring more of are socks, right? So I have these wool socks, And what I will do is I will bring a pair of socks for every day that I am on the trail. Because what I have found is that socks do not dry that quickly. These wool ones, they're great for helping still keep your feet warm when they are wet, but they don't dry overnight, at least not what I have found. So what I like doing, I'll take a sock for every day that I'm on the trail. So for the Art Loeb, I was there for 3 days, so I was wearing one pair of socks and then I would pack two others. And so when I got to camp, I can put on a fresh pair of socks and then I would generally sleep in those and then hike in those the next morning. And you're putting your your dry socks into probably wet shoes, right? So they'll get a little bit wet and I'll try to dry out my other pair of socks, but if it's raining all day, you may not have very much luck with that. So when I get into camp that next night, then I want a fresh pair of socks to sleep in. So I'll get into camp, put on another pair of fresh socks, and then I'll hike out in those the next day. So that is why I recommend, in really bad weather, that I would pack a pair of socks for each day that you're going to be on the trail. Now let's talk about my Puffy. So on most of my trips, you'll see me in the Mountain Hardwear Ghost Whisper Puffy. And I love this jacket. It is extremely light, very warm, and it just is great. But it's goose down. So when I'm expecting a lot of heavy rain, I switch up my Puffy. So I don't use goose down. Instead, I use a synthetic down. And so I have a jacket here from Outdoor Vitals, which is great. I love this. It's more, I would call it water resistant, so water will beat up on this a little better. It even has some little vents here in the pits as you're hiking in it. And I do that because, and really not just for my Puffy, but any type of down that I may have, I try to consider using synthetic. Because as you probably know, when goose down gets wet, it loses its ability to keep you warm and then takes forever to get dry. But with the synthetic down, it can get wet and it can still keep you dry. Now, this shouldn't get wet. I've got my rain jacket, but as I'm either walking in through camp and maybe rain is still falling from the trees up above, I just like having a more synthetic Puffy, just to make sure that in case something does happen, that I'm going to have a jacket that's going to keep me warm. The last thing concerning clothes I want to talk about are gloves. So when it is raining all day, and typically for me, that type of weather means it's cold outside. It's generally cold rain. So I've been trying to find a solution for keeping my hands warm while I am hiking. And obviously I could get waterproof gloves, but the issue I have with that is they tend to be really bulky. And what I want is gloves that I don't lose the dexterity of my fingers, that I can still use them. Especially when I get to camp, and I'm tying off my tarp or I'm tightening up my stakes for my tarp. I like to be able to use my fingers, and those bulkier gloves just makes that hard to do. So I've been looking for a way that I can keep my hands warm while hiking, as well as use them around camp without getting wet. And so what I tried for the first time on the Art Loeb Trail are these waterproof latex gloves. And you know what? It actually worked out pretty well. So what I would do is I would put on my normal wool gloves, and wool gloves will do a great job of still keeping your hands warm even though they get wet, but I don't want my gloves wet. I want to be able to use my gloves at night in my hammock, and I want them to be dry. I don't want them to be wet. So I would put on my wool gloves and then I would slide on one of these latex gloves on top of it. And that can be, it's a bit tricky, you know, because it's really tight. So it takes a little bit of work, you know, kind of getting them down over your fingers. But I thought it worked out pretty well. So on day one of the Art Loeb Trail, you know, especially as we got, you know, we were in that kind of fog and it was hailing and it was snowing, I slipped these on and my hands were warm. And when I got to camp, I noticed my gloves were still dry, so that was great. And then setting up my camp, I was still able to use my fingers in tying off my tarp to the tree and to the stakes on the ground. So it really served all the purposes that I was trying for, but it was the first time that I did that. So I think the jury is still out. I'd like to try it a few more times, and how well they work, but so far so good. How about my shoes? Well, I still prefer a trail runner over a boot, even though it's going to be heavy rain. Even though the boot is probably going to keep my foot warmer and drier during that hike, I just get blisters with boots as opposed to my trail runners. They're just not as comfortable, especially if I'm doing up a lot of mountains and up and over rocks and things like that. They're not as comfortable and I'll get blisters. Plus, I don't feel like those boots are going to dry out as quickly. So when I'm using my trail runners, you know, my feet aren't cold. You know, on that day one when it was beginning to hail and snow at the end of the day, my feet were not cold because they're constantly moving. They only got cold when I got to camp and I stopped. At that point, you know, I take them off and I put on a fresh pair of socks, and camp shoes is what I would do for that. But I feel that when I'm hiking in my trail runners, they're going to dry quicker than my boots are. And so I will still use a trail runner even though it's heavy rain. I think they're just more comfortable, and they're going to dry quicker the next day when I'm hiking if it's not raining. And they're just going to cause me less blisters. So I still use trail runners when it's going to rain a lot. Speaking of shoes, you heard me mention camp shoes. Now, camp shoes is something I typically don't take on my backpacking trips. I consider it a luxury item. But I will say for these type of trips where you're expecting heavy rain, I think they're important to take along. And I say that because when you get into camp, you know, you have these wet shoes, wet socks, and your feet are cold, and you just want to get out of them. So this is when I think it really is nice to have a pair of camp shoes. So what I can do then is, you know, slip on a pair of dry, warm socks and then slip on my camp shoes while I'm walking around camp. And that just makes me feel a lot better. Speaking of luxury items, one thing I would recommend taking if you're going to have really bad weather, and that is a camp chair. Now, I normally don't take camp chairs on my backpacking trips. You know, sometimes I do, but for the most part, I don't. And I didn't take it on this Art Loeb Trail, but I wish that I did. Because when I got into camp, you know, and my hammock is all set up and I'm ready to have a meal, I just wanted to get off the ground. You know, I did bring my butt pad and that's what I used, and I just put that on a wet rock. But I saw the other guys in a camp chair and I'm like, man, it would just be nice just to sit off the ground and get off, you know, all of that wet environment around me. So I do think having a camp chair to get off the wet ground would be really nice. Now let's talk about my shelter. So the question that I would get asked is, do you still go hammock camping when you're expecting such bad weather and heavy rain? And the answer is absolutely. In fact, I think this is one of the major pros of hammock camping over a tent. And that reason is because of my tarp. So I have found that, especially like when you are setting up camp or even breaking down camp and it's raining, I think a hammock is superior. And that's because what I do is when I get into camp, the first thing I'll do is I will hang my tarp and I'll, stake it down kind of temporarily on the sides so that I have a dry space to hang my hammock and pull out all of my gear and get everything set up under a dry environment. And I just think that is such a huge bonus to keeping my shelter and my quilt, my sleep system, all my clothes, everything completely dry. A few other pieces of gear that I have that are help from the rain is some waterproof bags. So this is my ditty bag where I just keep all my, small little stuff, whether it's my toiletries, Band-Aids, first aid kit, things like that. I also have a waterproof electronics bag. This is by Mountain Laurel Design, and the things I keep in here are all of my electronics, like my batteries, my flashlight, things like that. And again, this is something I might keep on the outside of my pack, but I don't want this to get wet. The ditty bag and the electronics bag, these are things I want to make sure that are in here. I want to have easy access to, so they're not in my pack or in my pack liner. They need to be on the outside of my pack. If they're on the outside of my pack, I want to make sure that they're going to stay dry regardless of what might happen. So I like having these waterproof bags for my electronics and my ditty bag. Another thing that I'll bring along is an extra camp towel. So typically I'll carry one bandana that I use for multiple purposes. And as I find, just even on normal trips, especially when it's heavy rain, it's wet and it stays wet all the time. Well, I like having a towel that I know that is going to be dry, or for the most part, it's going to be dry. This is something that I'll stick into one of my pockets of my rain jacket. I do not want this to get wet because I'll use it for things like drying off my camera lens, so there aren't all those water droplets on it. If I'm in camp, and I just want to dry off my hands or dry off my feet a little bit before I'm getting into my hammock, I want some type of towel that I can have that's going to remain, for the most part, dry. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Those are the things that I consider when I'm going to be backpacking in heavy rain. And the key really is to stay warm and dry, because it can get really dangerous out there, especially when those temperatures start dropping and you're wet and you're cold. You need to have something out there that can help you stay warm and dry in those type of environments. So those are the things that I do to help provide that level of protection for me when I'm out on the trail during really bad, thunderstorms and rain and hail and snow. And I felt like I was well prepared. Obviously, you're a little bit uncomfortable in that type of weather, but I never felt like I was in danger. I was fine during my hike. All my stuff stayed dry. And when I got to camp, I was able to set up camp under a dry environment, and I was able to get warm and get out of those wet clothes and those wet shoes. And that's really the key that you're looking for is, the gear that's going to help, protect you in that type of environment. All right, folks, thanks for watching. And until my next adventure, keep on blazing.